Hey guys, tonight we're traveling to the rugged, wind-whipped coasts of medieval Iceland, where volcanoes steam under fields of moss. Where winter lasts longer than patience. And where grown men once screamed at horses until someone passed out. You're wrapped in a thick wool cloak now, perched beside a smoking turf fire. And ahead of you lies a saga so strange, so icily dramatic, it might just lull you into the deepest of sleep. Just don't pick a fight with your neighbor's stallion. This isn't the cozy fairy tale version of Viking culture. This is Iceland after the settlers have arrived. The sagas have begun, and people still solve property disputes with axes, or worse, with hooves. And you? Well, you probably wouldn't survive a week out here. Not because of the weather, though that's brutal too, but because every single move you make might end up in court. Or in a saga. Or both. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Blank. Blank. You step out into a landscape that feels borrowed from another planet, craggy cliffs, sky-wide silence, and the kind of cold that gets into your teeth. It's the year 930 AD. Give or take, Iceland has no kings, no castles, and not a single knight in sight. What it does have is lava fields, sheep, and people who are both incredibly independent and permanently annoyed with each other. Your feet crunch over frost-kissed grass as you pass a cluster of turf-roofed houses. Their sod walls blending into the hill like Earth had decided to grow homes. Inside, families huddle close. Outside, tensions simmer. It's not a place for the overly chatty. Every insult is remembered. Every gift, every grudge, even how you tie your belt might be taken the wrong way. And yes, that's a real thing. Now imagine dropping a few hundred of the most stubborn, honor-bound, pride-soaked Norse settlers into this kind of pressure cooker. They've sailed across the Atlantic from Norway to get away from kings and centralized law. What they've created instead, a society where everyone is technically equal, but no one agrees on anything. And in this snow-covered sandbox of mutual mistrust, one particular animal rises to glory, the Icelandic horse. Compact, fierce, fluffier than it has any right to be. These horses aren't pets. Not quite. They're transport, companions, status symbols, and, occasionally, furry weapons of mass humiliation. That's where things get interesting. See, there are no proper cities here. No roads really, just narrow paths worn by hooves and boots. To travel, you need a horse. To move goods? Horse. To visit the Alþingi, Iceland's great yearly parliament/campout/grievance fest? You guessed it, horse. And if your horse is slower, scrappier, or somehow less majestic than your neighbor's, well, that's a problem, especially because your neighbor is probably related to you. And you've already insulted him over smoked lamb last winter. It doesn't take long before someone suggests a friendly competition. You bring your stallion, he brings his. You both yell encouragement and snide insults while the animals circle, snort, and try to assert dominance. What starts as a spectacle soon turns symbolic. A victory in the horse ring becomes a stand-in for a win in court. In gossip, even in love, if your stallion wins, you're stronger, smarter, possibly better looking, though that's debatable. But here's the kicker. These fights weren't just for fun. They were cultural currency. People gathered, bets were made, skalds, those traveling poets, might even turn the more dramatic bouts into verses. Which sounds kind of flattering, until you realize they also included who cried first and how bad your hair looked during the scuffle. Now, these fights weren't exactly organized with safety regulations. The horses could be injured, sure, but more often it was the humans who walked away limping, or didn't walk away at all. And yet, they kept happening, season after season. Feud after feud. Historians still argue whether horse fighting in Iceland was imported from mainland Scandinavia or invented locally. Perhaps out of equal parts boredom and testosterone. Some claim it's rooted in older pagan rituals. Others see it as a makeshift solution for a society that didn't want too many blood feuds, but still craved a little public dominance display. What we do know, by the late 10th century, the horse fight had become a spectacle with rules, traditions, and consequences, and eventually, laws. But we're not there yet. You're still watching from the edge of a frosty field, wind biting your cheeks, as two shaggy stallions paw the ground and lock eyes. Around you, a circle of spectators cheers, some already a few horns of ale deep. Your host whispers bets under his breath. Somewhere behind you, someone shouts, he always uses that trick with the left hind leg. The horses clash, briefly, then circle again. The crowd quiets. You realize you're holding your breath. You also realize something else. No one's really watching the horses anymore. They're watching each other. And that, right there, is the real fight. Tiny island, huge egos. You're still standing on that frosty field, breath turning into mist, watching two stallions posture like brawny dancers who forgot the choreography. But now your focus has shifted to the crowd, because it's not just about the horses. It's about them. Men wrapped in cloaks of sheepskin and pride. Women whispering observations more cutting than any sword. A teenage boy trying not to flinch every time his father's horse takes a hit. And right there, at the center of it all, is the spirit of medieval Iceland. A place where reputations are harder to build than turf homes and far easier to tear down. See, Iceland around the year 1000 isn't just physically isolated, it's emotionally, politically, and legally a powder keg. With no king, no police, and no prisons. This is a society built on mutual respect, or at least mutual fear. Every family is its own fortress of opinion, and honor is currency. If you insult someone's horse, you're not criticizing livestock, you're attacking lineage. And if your horse loses? Well, best hope you packed a good apology speech. Or a sword. Or both. The Alþingi, the Icelandic parliament founded in 930 AD, is the great equalizer. But also a great stage. Once a year, people trek across miles of inhospitable landscape, pitching tents beside the Lawrock to gossip, argue, and occasionally settle centuries-old vendettas. If your family's name is on someone else's lips at the aim, you're either doing very well or very badly. The irony? This entire legal system is, at its root, designed not to be violent. It's a society terrified of spiraling revenge cycles. Kill one man, and you owe blood money to his family. Refuse to pay, and now they can kill you. Miss that payment? Welcome to a feud. Within a few generations, nobody even remembers what started it, but the hatred is inherited like family recipes. So what does this have to do with horse fights? Everything. In a world where drawing your sword too quickly might get your cousin killed by someone else's cousin's cousin. Symbolic conflict is gold. Instead of dueling with axes, Icelanders duel with horses. The battles are loud, thrilling, a bit chaotic, and, importantly, less fatal. Or at least that's the goal. But remember, this is a land of huge egos packed into a small island. There's no escaping your rivals. You all shop at the same market, fish in the same streams, and go to the same inn. If your neighbor hates you, he might not say it, but he'll sure show it when his horse, accidentally, stomps yours during a match. Oops. And Icelandic egos? They're legendary. There's a reason the sagas are filled with characters who would rather die dramatically than be embarrassed quietly. One chieftain famously burned his enemies in their house because they snubbed his wedding invitation. That's the level of petty we're dealing with. So when someone's horse is defeated, that bruises more than pride, it bruises an entire family legacy. One story, passed down like a bedtime tale with teeth, tells of two cousins who trained horses together for months. At the match, one horse hesitated, and the other seized the opportunity. The fight was over in minutes. The losing cousin sulked, then blamed the winner for spooking his stallion. A few snide comments later, one man was limping home. The other was summoned to court. Over a horse. A fluffy, majestic, four-legged feud magnet. Historians still argue whether these fights were officially sanctioned events or spontaneous dramas that only looked organized. Some believe local chieftains encouraged them to keep rivalries from escalating into violence. Others argue the matches were more grassroots, hosted on neutral ground, judged by whoever looked least biased that day, and maintained by sheer force of social tradition. But one thing's clear, these weren't underground brawls. They were events. People came from miles away. Children climbed trees to watch. Traders sold roasted lamb on skewers. Someone brought a goat. There's always a goat. And in the center of all this? The proud horse owner. Maybe a farmer. Maybe a chieftain. Maybe just someone with the loudest voice and the best ale. They puff out their chests. They list their horse's ancestry like it's a royal bloodline. He's the grandson of Frosthoof the Bold, someone cries. As if Frosthoof ever paid taxes. As you stand in that crowd, watching this strange mix of testosterone and tradition, it starts to click. The horse is a proxy. The fight is a dance. And the people? They're here for something far more complex than sport. They're here to see and be seen. To prove loyalty. To settle scores. To flirt. To fume. And to watch someone else's dignity take a hit. And sometimes, just sometimes, the horses aren't the only ones who come out of it bruised. Horses are everything here. You walk away from the muddy arena now. Boots a little heavier with clay and your mind buzzing with one simple realization. Horses in medieval Iceland aren't just animals. They are the pulse of the society. In a world without wheeled carts, paved roads, or delivery goats, tragically, your horse is your car, your postal service, your Netflix password, and sometimes, your therapist. And not just any horse will do. No, sir, you need an Icelandic horse. Small? Sure. But sturdy? Absolutely. Think of them as the marshmallow tanks of the equine world, fluffy, compact, but capable of climbing a glacier while looking smug about it. They have 5 gaits, which is 2 more than most horses and about 3 more than most Icelanders want to walk on their own. You reach a small farmstead nestled between 2 lava ridges. A dozen horses graze outside, their manes tangled in the wind. One looks up at you, eyes glinting with what you swear is judgment. Inside the turf house, the family talks about horses the way modern folks talk about reality TV. Who's gotten lazy? Who showed promise? Who kicked Uncle Orier in the chest last week and ruined the stew? It becomes clear. Horses are bred with care, trained with patience, and evaluated with more intensity than some political leaders. Stallions are praised or shamed based on not just their strength, but their attitude. A horse that wins fights but bites children? Risky. A gentle stallion who loses with grace? Possibly holy. One old man, cradling a mug of fermented sheep milk, yes, that's a thing, tells you. A man without a horse is like a ship without a sail. He then belches, loudly, but the metaphor sticks. And it's not just about status. Iceland's terrain is rougher than a week-old wool blanket. Rivers slice the land into unpredictable paths. Snow piles up like it's hoarding the whole country. Roads are more suggestion than infrastructure. The only way to travel, trade, or tell your cousin you're still mad about the inheritance? Horse. That's why, by law, horses are protected. Theft? A crime. Injury through negligence? You'll owe compensation. Kill someone's prized stallion? You might just start a blood feud that outlives you and your sheep. Historians still debate whether horse ownership was widespread among all social classes or mostly confined to wealthier farmsteads and chieftains. Some argue even the poorest tried to keep one gelding for emergencies. Others claim a man with no horse was seen as, well, not quite a man. Now imagine what it means when that horse fights. The stakes are personal. financial, emotional. If your stallion wins, it elevates your entire household. If he loses, prepare for awkward silences at the next inn. But the Icelandic horse isn't just a tool or a symbol. It's mythic. Folktales whisper of horses that could find their way home through fog. Others knew when a storm was coming. Some were said to see ghosts. Whether you believe that or not, one thing is clear. These animals weren't just part of Icelandic life, they defined it. One saga even tells of a man who left all his worldly goods to his favorite horse, though. Awkwardly, the law didn't quite support that will. Another story claims a mare refused to eat after her rider died in battle. She walked into the ocean. Never seen again. The moral? Probably something about loyalty. Or dramatic flair. You reach out to stroke a stallion tied to a hitching post. He snorts, stomps once, and gives you a look that says, "Try me." You step back. He wins. Just like that. It dawns on you that Icelanders may have bred these horses not just for strength, but for spirit. You don't want a horse that gives up easily, not on rough trails, not in bad weather, and certainly not in a brawl. These horses mirror their owners, proud, resilient, and occasionally terrifying. It's also why horse fights, for all their brutality, held such significance. This wasn't idle entertainment. It was the natural extension of a society built on honor, survival, and watching your neighbors just a little too closely. The horse wasn't just fighting another horse. It was fighting for you. So next time someone asks why Icelanders had a law about horse fights, remember, it's not about the horses. It never really was. The art of the horse fight. You shuffle closer to the center of a new field now, one flatter, more carefully cleared than most of the ragged, moss-carpeted hills you passed. There's a hush in the crowd that wasn't there earlier. The mood has shifted. No one's yelling yet. No one's betting aloud. That's because what's about to unfold isn't just a brawl, it's a performance. Welcome to the Hestivig, the Icelandic horse fight. And yes, there's an art to it. Imagine two stallions, both trained for this moment. They're not warhorses. Not racers, but battle-hardened divas with thick manes, low centers of gravity, and egos larger than fjords. The handlers lead them to opposite sides of the field, keeping them apart for now. Their bodies taut with anticipation and, yes, possibly mild irritation from the cold. It's not a cage match. There's no bell. Instead, the handlers inch closer, letting the stallions catch each other's scent. Ears flick. Hooves scrape. Then, the handlers step back, fast, and the real show begins. There's no command. No, fight, yelled into the wind. Just instinct. The stallions surge forward, necks arched, teeth bared. They rear, circle, lash out with hooves. But it's not chaos, not really. There's rhythm here, a kind of grim choreography. Bite, dodge, kick, pivot. Some fights last minutes. Others? Nearly an hour. And the people? They're rapt. You can feel the tension buzz along the frozen grass. Some cheer. Some wince. Everyone watches. Because while the stallions do the biting, it's the handlers who feel the sting of defeat. Of course, there are no helmets, no referees. This is all managed through a mix of tradition, unspoken rules, and the occasional intervention when things go too far, usually involving a large stick, a brave handler, and a lot of yelling. Now, you may be thinking, why would anyone risk their prized horse in something like this? But here's the twist, it wasn't only about winning. It was about proving that your stallion had the right spirit. A strong horse that ran away from a fight? Embarrassing. A weaker horse that stood its ground and bit back? That could earn respect. There's a certain strange logic to it. Just as Icelandic men were judged by how they handled disputes, not necessarily by how they won them, but how they behaved, so too were horses evaluated not just for dominance, but for courage, composure, grit. Historians still argue whether there were standardized ways to judge a horse fight. Some sagas suggest winners were declared based on clear retreats, whichever horse backed away first. Others say the crowd simply knew. If your stallion made the other bleed, victory. If yours looked confused and sniffed a flower mid-fight, well, good luck living that down. And then there were handlers. Their job was part trainer, part psychologist, part hype man. They knew exactly how much to rile their horse up before the match. Not too calm, not too wild. A delicate balance, like seasoning stew. Too much aggression, and your stallion might overextend. Too little, and he'll look like he wandered into the wrong event. One saga tells of a man who whispered threats to his stallion before a match, promising he'd be turned into boots if he lost. The horse won. Historians debate whether this was actual encouragement or just bizarre humor passed down as history. Either way, it worked, and there were rules, of a sort. Stallions only. No mares, far too distracting. No weapons, obviously, and no magical charms. Though that didn't stop a few handlers from slipping charms into their belt pouches or whispering a protection rune behind their horse's ear. If caught, the punishment was public shame. And in Icelandic society, that hurt more than a broken rib. There's one match still told of today, involving a stallion called Storm Nose and another nicknamed Grey Thunder. The fight was so even, so perfectly balanced, that neither backed down. The two circled for over 40 minutes, trading bites and kicks until both collapsed from exhaustion. Neither won, and yet both handlers walked away with more honor than they'd ever had before. That's the paradox of Icelandic horsefights. You could lose and still win. It's easy to forget, standing in the snow and watching two shaggy stallions battle it out, that this isn't just rustic sport. It's reputation management. It's feuding with plausible deniability. It's masculine performance, with fur. Even children get in on the act. They watch closely, mimicking their fathers, learning which postures suggest strength. One day, they'll choose a stallion of their own. One they'll train, raise, and, if they're brave, let fight. Not for money, not for spectacle, but for something quieter. Something that lingers longer than bruises. Because in a land where memory is sharper than steel, a single well-fought match could echo through generations. Feuds on four legs. You're sitting now on a half-frozen log, breath fogging in the morning chill, listening to two men argue over whether one stallion looked away first or merely blinked. The fight happened yesterday, but the debate will outlive the horses, and possibly their owners. Because here in medieval Iceland, a horse fight is never just about horses. It's a proxy war, a family feud with hooves. To understand this, you have to go back, way back, to the roots of Icelandic society. This isn't a kingdom with a tidy court system. It's a scattered quilt of farmsteads, chieftaincies, and fragile alliances. When someone offends you here, you don't press charges, you press your entire extended family into battle readiness. But violence is expensive, and messy, and it has this inconvenient habit of dragging in innocent cousins. So people found alternatives. Like horses. Your horse becomes your champion, your fury made flesh. And if your neighbor insulted your craftsmanship, accused your cousin of stealing hay, or simply stepped on your pride during the winter feast, you bring your stallion to the field. He brings his, and while the horses snap and rear, the men watch, with crossed arms and tight jaws. It's cathartic, sort of, until it's not, because every so often, the losing side doesn't take it well. Maybe they blame the field conditions. Maybe they accuse the other handler of using sorcery. Maybe they simply can't bear the smirks around the village when their stallion limps home with a bruised ego and a slightly crooked tail. That's when things escalate. Some fights sparked years of retaliatory disputes. You bruised my stallion in spring? Don't be surprised when I refuse to share pasture in autumn. And don't expect an invitation to my daughter's wedding, or to the feast, or the funeral. You might still get a spot on the lawsuit scroll, though. One saga tells of a man named Erikor who lost a horse fight, then claimed his opponent had trained the stallion to aim for the knees. He filed a complaint at the Alingi. When that failed, he He started publicly questioning the other man's ancestry, an insult more serious than theft. Before long, someone's barn burned down, and wouldn't you know it? That same stallion mysteriously vanished the next winter. Historians still argue whether these feuds were truly triggered by horse fights, or whether the matches were simply the spark to an already smoldering fire. Some claim the fights were used to avoid violence, an agreed-upon outlet. Others argue the matches often poured oil on old resentments, with the horses paying the price for human bitterness. You watch now as one man walks stiffly away from the crowd, his cloak fluttering like a warning flag. His stallion didn't lose badly, but it lost. And he knows what that means. Tonight, someone will mention it at the fire. Tomorrow, someone else will chuckle too loudly at the wrong moment. The sting will last. Meanwhile, the winner struts, not arrogantly, but with that subtle air of, "I told you so," that Icelanders have perfected over centuries. His stallion gets an extra helping of dried fish and a nuzzle behind the ear. He gets bragging rights, maybe even a little political leverage at the next game. But here's where it gets really interesting. Sometimes, these four-legged feuds were arranged. That's right, planned. Two men might not be ready to draw swords, but they're absolutely ready to pit their stallions against each other. The field becomes a courtroom. The horses the advocates, the crowd the jury, and no one bleeds, ideally. And sometimes, one of the horses doesn't show up, because the handler knows that to fight would be to lose, and to lose would be to admit weakness. In those cases, the absence is its own kind of defeat, one that follows you like a limp in the saga of your life. You glance across the field now, where two young boys are brushing their family's horses, whispering encouragement, not for riding, not for farming, but for battle. Because here, from the moment they can walk, Icelanders know that reputation isn't carved with swords. It's shaped with snorts and stomping hooves. You wonder if maybe this was the genius of the system. In a land too small for war, too fragile for monarchy, too proud for submission, people created a way to fight without breaking everything. A way to burn, without fire. But like any flame, it still left scars. The saga of Snorri's stallion. The wind cuts sharper this morning as you make your way to a different kind of battlefield. Not one churned up by hooves, but etched into the memory of a saga. Because here in medieval Iceland, stories are currency, and the best ones are never quite finished. And the tale you're about to hear? It starts with a horse named Frostmane, and a man named Snorri. Snorri Orgrimsson was not a quiet man. His beard was thick, his voice louder than the sea wind, and his pride? Practically a separate personality. He owned land, sheep, and a stallion that he claimed could outrun shadow and bite through bone. Now, whether Frostmane actually had magical teeth is debatable, but what's not up for debate is how much Snorri loved him. Every spring, Snorri brought Frostmane to the matches. And every year, Frostmane won. He didn't just win, he danced. He dodged kicks, bit with precision, and always ended the match on his hooves while the other horse stumbled away with a dazed expression and possibly a bruised ego. Locals swore Frostmane could smell fear. Or maybe he just hated losing as much as Snorri did. It wasn't long before the victories piled up, and so did the whispers. Some said Snorri had trained Frostmane with dark charms. Others claimed the stallion was half-spirit, born under a blood moon. One particularly dramatic farmer insisted the horse's breath turned warm milk sour. But the real trouble started when Frostmane was matched against a stallion owned by Asbjorn, Snorri's cousin. And if you're getting the sense that Icelandic feuds often involve cousins, congratulations! You're beginning to understand the family tree here. It's less a tree and more a tangled thicket of grudges, favors, and complicated dinner invitations. The match was intense. Frostmane circled, snorted, and lunged with his usual ferocity. But Asbjorn's stallion, named Redtooth, because subtlety is not an Icelandic trait, held his ground. The fight stretched on. Dust rose. People leaned forward, And then, Frostmane slipped. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't collapse. Just a misstep. A sideways stumble. But in that moment, Redtooth lunged and scored a deep bite to Frostmane's flank. Blood bloomed against white fur. And Snorri? He went very still. The fight was stopped. No clear winner declared. But everyone saw what happened. Later that evening, at the feast, Snorri refused to speak. When someone toasted to Redtooth's grit, Snorri left the table. The next morning, Redtooth was gone. Vanished. No witnesses. No hoofprints. Just a patch of disturbed earth near the edge of the river. Asbjorn knew. Everyone knew. But no one could prove it. Snorri denied everything with the calm of a man who'd already written the new ending in his head. He brought Frostmane back to the field the following year. The stallion had healed, though the scar remained. Snorri positioned him proudly, as if daring anyone to mention the past. But the crowd watched more warily now. The excitement was edged with unease. The story had shifted. Historians still argue about whether Snorri had Redtooth killed, or whether Asbjorn hid the horse to avoid another loss. One theory even suggests the horse was traded secretly to a chieftain in the east, who prized stallions but hated drama. Good luck finding one of those. But the sagas picked up the tale, of course. In one version, Frostmane dies of heartbreak. In another, he wins one last match and then walks into the mountains alone. Like a four-legged Viking Clint Eastwood. Yet another claims Snorri was cursed afterward, his crops failed. His sheep wandered off cliffs. And his beard turned prematurely gray. None of it's provable. All of it feels true. You walk now across that very field, flat, silent, touched by frost. The same ground where Frostmane bled. Where Redtooth vanished. Where Snorri stood, fists clenched under his cloak. What lingers here isn't just the echo of hooves. It's the weight of a society that recorded everything in memory. No newspapers. No viral clips. Just word of mouth. Carried from fire to fire. Whispered in longhouses. Woven into verse. In that world, a single misstep, literal or reputational, could become legend. And poor Frostmane? He was just a horse. But thanks to Snorri's pride, he became something else. A symbol. A wound. A mystery never quite resolved. Even now, the locals might tell you to look twice when walking near the river in late spring. You might hear hooves, or a neigh that echoes just a little too long. And if you see a white horse vanish into the mist, blood, turf, and fur cloaks. The snow is melting now. Just enough to reveal the dark soil underneath, a thick, clumpy earth that remembers every hoofprint, every scuffle, every grudge. And this particular stretch of land you're walking across? It's not just pasture. It's the site of one of the most hotly contested matches in early Icelandic memory. Not because of the horses, though they were impressive, but because of what lay beneath them. Property lines, pride, and a badly timed love affair. See, in medieval Iceland, land is more than livelihood. It's identity. There are no grand castles. No sweeping estates with stone walls. What you have is what you farm. And that's where things get deliciously complicated. Because those borders? They aren't always marked. They're remembered, passed down in sagas and casual threats. So when two families, let's call them the Gunnlaugsons and the Bjarnars, decide to hold a horse fight, they don't just argue about stallions. They argue about where to hold it. One insists the flat field near the lava ridge is perfect. The other claims that ridge has always belonged to their great someone. There's shouting. There's a mention of a blood pact from 3 generations back. And somewhere in the mix, someone brings up the issue of a fur cloak gone missing during last winter's festival. This is Icelandic conflict. Everything is connected. In this particular case, the horse fight is eventually held on the border between the properties, neutral ground. Technically, but it's clear neither family believes that. They arrive with matching cloaks, matching scowls, and stallions bred more for making statements than making friends. The match begins. The crowd gathers. The horses circle, snap, rear, But then something odd happens. The Bjarner's stallion loses focus, snorts, backs off, and then, horrors, sits down. Just sits, like it's done. The Gunlaug sons erupt in laughter. Someone shouts that the stallion has the spirit of a milk cow. That's not even a common insult. But it lands. And then the real fight starts. Between the humans. Fists fly. A man falls into a puddle. Someone's fur cloak gets torn, not the missing one. A different one. Women yell. Children scatter. And the horses? They just watch. Confused. Possibly embarrassed. By evening, the field is empty except for hoofprints. Pride. And one lonely boot. Stories like these aren't rare. Sagas are filled with moments where horse fights tipped over into full-blown chaos. Not because people wanted violence, but because they brought their baggage to the match. And Icelanders? They carry centuries of it, wrapped neatly in wool and silence. Historians still argue whether land disputes were the real trigger behind most of these brawls. Some believe the fights were carefully chosen, held on tension points on purpose, like social pressure valves. Others suggest it was all unplanned, a natural consequence of putting proud people too close together with stakes that feel higher than they are. And then there's the matter of fur cloaks. In Iceland, a fur cloak isn't just a fashion choice. It's warmth, wealth, a wearable resume. Losing one? That's a personal offense. Being accused of stealing one? That's grounds for court, or worse, for insinuation. And Icelanders are masters of the insinuated insult. They won't call you a thief. They'll just say your cloak has a familiar cut, and then mention that their cousin used to have one just like it. One saga tells of a cloak-related scandal that began at a horse fight and ended with 3 families not speaking for 15 years. The irony? No one was sure the cloak was even stolen. It may have just been badly dyed and easily confused. But by then, the fight had passed into legend. You now stand on that same kind of field, grass slowly reclaiming the trampled ground. Wind whispering over stone. It's quiet now, but if you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The arguing, the laughter, the slap of palm on fur-lined chest as someone swears he'll take the matter to the Alingi. It's always about more than the horses. And yet, the horses endure, steady, watchful, innocent participants in human theatrics. You reach out to pet one now. A broad-chested bay with a mane like seaweed and eyes like old stories. He snorts softly. Maybe he remembers. Maybe he's descended from a stallion that once sat down mid-fight and changed a feud forever. Either way, he leans into your hand. The ing keeps getting louder. Now, it's summer. The sky stretches wide and blue above the plains of Ingvellir, where the grass grows high and the rivers slice clean through ancient volcanic rock. This is no ordinary pasture. This is the beating heart of Iceland's early legal system. The Alingi, a grand outdoor parliament where everyone shows up with laws to discuss, fish to trade, and at least 3 grudges to settle. And when we say everyone, we mean everyone. Chieftains, farmers, poets, fortune-tellers, goat owners, and at least one suspicious man with a cart full of skulls. The atmosphere is part courtroom, part festival, part therapy session, and as you weave your way through the tents and cook fires, one thing becomes clear. People here love talking. Loudly, passionately, often simultaneously. Especially when it comes to horse fights. You arrive just in time to witness one such debate. 2 men, let's call them John and Bersi, stand before the law rock. Red in the face, arms flailing like windmills caught in a storm. The subject? Whether Bersi's stallion actually bit first, or whether John's stallion provoked it by blinking aggressively. The law speaker, yes, that's a real job, sits nearby, trying very hard not to sigh audibly. His role is to recite the laws from memory. That's right, every law. From how to claim abandoned land to what happens when your neighbor's sheep trespass and eat your roof moss. And now, he has to adjudicate which stallion gave the first kick in a match that happened 3 months ago. Why? Because horse fights are serious business. You see, the Alinghi wasn't just a place for trial and punishment. It was a space to maintain balance. Icelanders brought their grievances here in hopes of avoiding bloodshed back home. Horse fights, while informal in structure, often ended in formal complaints. If your horse was injured due to someone else's negligence, or, more dramatically, if a fight led to human injury, legal action wasn't just possible. It was expected. Historians still argue whether the Alinghi encouraged or discouraged these fights. Some say the open gatherings actually created safer environments. Matches could be watched by witnesses. Judgments handed down quickly. Others suggest that the public nature of the event turned simple disagreements into spectacle. Inflaming tempers and egos. Either way, the noise is constant. Disputes pile up like firewood. Over there, a woman accuses her neighbor of training his stallion using a cursed bell. A few feet away, a teenager insists his horse didn't lose, it just tactically disengaged. The law speaker rubs his temples. But out of the chaos, something remarkable emerges. Law. Icelanders didn't write their early laws down. Not yet. Everything was oral. And so, when a horse fight went wrong, the only solution was to stand up at the inn and tell the story. In exacting detail, with at least 4 witnesses and preferably a rhyming verse. It's messy, it's noisy, but it works. One famous case, recorded later in a saga, tells of a fight between 2 young men that ended in one getting trampled. The stallions were blamed, but the real heat was between the fathers. When the case was brought to the Alinghi, each side gave their version. Voices rose, weapons were nearly drawn, and just when it seemed like it might all explode into violence, an old farmer stepped forward. He had seen the fight, and he calmly explained that the injured boy had actually tripped on his own cloak before the horses even touched him. The case dissolved, the feud paused, and someone even passed around smoked salmon in relief. You sit now on a sun-warmed rock beside the river, listening as 2 teenage girls discuss whether to enter their horses in next summer's match. One's worried her stallion is too shy. The other claims hers, smiles before kicking. These aren't warriors, they're caretakers, and yet their stakes are just as high. Because here, everything funnels back to the Alinghi. Reputation, honor, who gets to claim victory in the social memory. And increasingly, what laws need to be created to deal with the chaos? There's already talk, you hear, of codifying how horse fights are judged, of punishing handlers who rile up their stallions beyond reason, of banning matches that take place without an agreed-upon referee. It's early days yet, but the rumblings are there. The ing is getting louder. Not because people are less civil, but because they care more. About fairness, about clarity, about preventing Frost Main-style feuds that leave both horses and humans limping into the next generation. You stand and stretch. The crowd is still buzzing. Someone nearby recites a half-remembered verse about a horse that won 3 matches in a row and was then given an entire barrel of dried fish as a reward. You don't know if it's true. You hope it is. Because in this world, stories and laws live side by side. And horse fights? They sit right in the middle, kicking up dust, stirring old grudges, and shaping the rules that hold a wild society together. The law that tried to tame testosterone. The wind tugs at your cloak again, this time less playfully. The warmth of the ing fades as you descend a hill into a quieter valley, where the noise of squabbling stallion owners can't reach you. And here, on this stone carved by time and temper, you find something quietly revolutionary. A law. Not a law about murder or theft. Not about borders or inheritance. No, this one? It's about horse fights. Imagine the scene. A society built on personal pride, swirling with unresolved disputes, and obsessed with public displays of strength, finally realizing, you know what? Maybe this needs some structure. And thus, the lawmakers of medieval Iceland, with all the solemnity of men trying not to laugh mid-argument, gathered to write down what could and couldn't happen when two stallions faced off. The law they etched into memory wasn't long. Icelandic laws rarely were, but it was precise. It limited where and when horsefights could take place. It clarified that injuries, especially to humans, during a fight could be grounds for compensation. It even defined acceptable behavior for handlers. Those ever-dramatic men whose shouting could turn a spirited match into a full-blown blood feud. Now, before you get the idea that this was some kind of official sports regulation board handing out yellow cards, let's be clear. This wasn't to protect the horses. It was, almost hilariously, to protect the people from themselves. See, Icelanders didn't mind a little chaos. But they dreaded full-scale family feuds. One wrong kick, one bruised ego, and suddenly there's a 3-generation standoff. With marriages called off and stew recipes withheld in passive-aggressive silence. And so, in a society without jails or police, the only real weapon against that kind of chaos was law. Historians still argue about the exact date the horse-fighting law entered the Gragas. Iceland's medieval law code. Some say it was the 11th century. Others argue for earlier, citing a peculiar reference in a saga that predates formal codification. But what's clear is that by the time laws were written down, the horsefight law was already folklore with footnotes. It laid out that if a person was maimed during a fight, by a kick, a fall, or by being a bit too enthusiastic in the post-match celebration, the responsible party had to pay full compensation. That meant silver, livestock, or goods of equal value. There was no room for, it was an accident, or, the horse was just expressing itself. If your stallion did the damage, and you brought it to the field, you paid the price. It also tried, gently, to dissuade handlers from letting things get out of hand. If two horses locked horns and the humans joined in, the law said, separate the animals. Don't fuel the fight. Don't throw rocks. Don't, and this is real, bite the other handler. You raise an eyebrow. Somewhere, sometime, someone clearly did just that. You start to see the problem. Laws can't fix pride. They can't untangle the knot of humiliation. Or stop a man from muttering threats into his ale. What they can do is provide a structure. A kind of fragile fence around a dangerous pasture. And Icelanders, despite their love of shouting and poetic revenge, respected law. Even when they broke it, they wanted it to exist. A feud might be blood-soaked and generations long, but both sides would still show up to the Alingi to argue about which law the other violated. One saga tells of a man fined for instigating a horsefight outside the legal boundary. His defense? The horse walked there on its own. The judge's reply? Then next time, train a horse that knows the law. That's peak medieval Icelandic sarcasm. But the law wasn't just a leash. It was a mirror. It reflected what mattered most: reputation, responsibility, and the desire to control chaos just enough to enjoy it. Because these matches weren't going away. Not with all the rules in the world. You don't outlaw a national pastime, you shape it, define its edges, and try to keep the fallout to a minimum. You run your fingers over the stone near your feet, where moss clings and time has worn away the sharpness. Somewhere beneath this landscape are the voices of those lawmakers, trying, with limited tools and infinite patience, to say, fight if you must. But here's where the madness ends. The wind rises again, somewhere in the distance. A stallion neighs, not in anger, but in challenge. Maybe the next fight is already being arranged. Maybe a proud handler is preparing his speech. Maybe someone's sharpening the memory of an insult into something that sounds just legal enough. And maybe, just maybe, someone's rereading that old law before they act. Just in case. Bragging rights and broken ribs. You find yourself back at a local gathering now, less official than the Alingi, but no less intense. A midsummer crowd has gathered on the edge of a pasture. The air thick with the smell of dried fish, sweat, and anticipation. Men in wool cloaks lean against their walking sticks, exchanging low, knowing glances. Young boys puff out their chests and toss stones, pretending not to be nervous. And somewhere near the front, two handlers are busy not making eye contact with each other. Because today's match isn't just another horse fight. It's a rematch. Everyone remembers what happened last time. One stallion lost by a hair. One handler swore he'd return with a real horse this time. One grandmother hasn't stopped talking about it since. And she's here now, leaning on her cane, eyes sharp. The crowd quiets. The stallions are led in, both snorting, both twitching with energy, and both absolutely ready to earn bragging rights for their humans. And that's what this really is about, bragging rights. That intoxicating cocktail of pride and performance, seasoned with just enough danger to make it worth watching. The horses lunge, the crowd erupts, and suddenly you're swept into the rush of it, hooves pounding. Men shouting, hands thrown in the air. One stallion lands a solid blow. The other bites back. It's not just a fight. It's a conversation. And each stomp and snort says, "Remember me." But then comes the turn. A handler, let's call him Kajartan, leans too far into the ring. He's shouting, gesturing, caught up in the moment. His horse swings suddenly, back leg, wild kick, and catches him square in the ribs. The crowd gasps. Kajartan drops like a stone. The horses are separated, the match halted. Men rush in. One mutters, "It's his own fault." Another shakes his head, already calculating whether compensation will be owed. The injury isn't life-threatening, but it's painful, the kind of painful that lingers in winter. Kajartan is helped to his feet, pale and wheezing, but trying, he's trying, not to look like it hurts. Because the only thing worse than broken ribs is a broken reputation. You might think that's the end of it, that Kajartan will retire quietly. Let someone else take the reins. But no, because this is exactly why people keep coming back to these fights, not despite the risk, but because of it. A win at a horse fight isn't just about the horse. It's about the story you'll tell afterward. How you trained him, how he learned to anticipate kicks, how he's descended from a line of fighters that stretches back to Norway, or Valhalla, or possibly a very confident pony. And if you lose, you find a reason. The weather, the terrain, the other horse's breath, too aggressive. If your pride is bruised, you wrap it in humor. You pour ale over it. You swear next time you'll bring the real stallion. As if this one was just a warm-up act. Historians still debate whether the Icelanders viewed these matches as sport or as something more ritualistic. Some compare them to trial by combat, testing not just animals, but divine favor. Others believe they were simply theatrical ways to resolve disputes and reassert hierarchy without total bloodshed. Either way, people came for the drama. And the stakes weren't always physical. One account tells of a handler whose horse lost 3 matches in a row. He wasn't injured, he wasn't fined, but his neighbors stopped inviting him to feasts. When he tried to propose marriage to a local widow, she told him, "I prefer stallions that know how to win." Ouch. The pressure to win well, and lose with dignity, was enormous. A man who mocked a defeated rival too openly might find himself suddenly unpopular. But a man who nodded respectfully and offered a drink afterward, that was remembered, admired, possibly written into verse by a wandering poet, if he was especially lucky, or paid in cheese. Today, the stallions are calm again, being led away to rest. Kajartan sits on a low bench, breathing carefully. Someone hands him a cup of warm broth. He winces as he drinks. But he's smiling now, barely. Because he knows one thing for certain. People will be talking about this match for months. And next year? He'll be back. Maybe with better padding, beer, boasting, and bad ideas. Night falls like a thick wool blanket over the valley. A fire crackles nearby, sending smoke curling into the darkening sky. You're seated among a loose circle of farmers, chieftains, and handlers, all nursing cups of fermented whey or something suspiciously labeled barley brew. One man is roasting a fish he claims he caught with a spoon. Another is recounting, for the 3rd time, How his stallion once scared a bear. No one corrects him. That would be rude, and also possibly dangerous. This is the after party of the horse fight. And it's where things often get more unpredictable than the matches themselves. You'd think, after a day of shouting, kicking, and public humiliation, people would want to go home and soak their bruises in sheep fat salve. But no, this is where the real battles unfold, the verbal kind. Boasting is a social ritual here. One that's part theater, part therapy, and part subtle threat. A young man across from you raises his mug and proclaims, "My stallion's hooves are sharper than your wife's cooking." There's a pause. Everyone watches the older man he's clearly targeting. The older man takes a long, slow sip, nods, and replies, "Ah, so that's why your horse limps." Laughter erupts. Someone nearly drops their bowl of stew. Someone else starts composing a crude poem on the spot. These jokes might seem harmless, and often they are. But when pride runs this deep and ale flows this freely, a comment meant in jest can veer into insult with the speed of a startled goat. It's said that more than a few minor feuds began not in the ring, but after the match, when men with bruised egos and full bellies began comparing whose stallion really deserved to win. One saga recounts a feast where a man accused another of secretly rubbing his stallion with butter to make him slippery and hard to bite. The accused responded by dumping cold broth over his head. That might have been the end of it, until someone threw a shoe. A literal one. Historians still argue whether these post-match feasts were official parts of the horse fighting tradition or just organic Icelandic chaos. Some claim chieftains hosted them to keep tensions down. Others think they increased tensions by placing too many proud men too close to the fire. Whatever the truth, one thing is clear. A belly full of fermented dairy and half-baked swagger has never been a recipe for good decision-making. And then, of course, there's the singing. Oh yes, Icelanders love a good verse. Especially when it's improvised. Especially when it rhymes. Especially when it lightly mocks someone who's had a few too many sips of barley brew. One handler, older, red-nosed, eyes sharp, launches into a song about a rival's horse that fights like a duck and smells like fish stew. Everyone howls. The rival in question laughs. But there's a flicker of something behind his eyes. A reminder. Insults. Even in song. Leave footprints. Someone else chimes in with a tale of a horse fight that was cancelled because one stallion ran away to chase a butterfly. Another jokes about a stallion who refused to fight unless a specific goat was present nearby. The goat, they say, gave him confidence. But then, someone tells a darker tale. Of a night not unlike this one, when a man accused another of bribing the match referee with a gift of smoked lamb. The accused laughed it off. But later, the accuser was found with a split lip and a broken thumb. No one saw what happened. No one asked. The match wasn't spoken of again. You sip your drink and realize something important. Icelanders don't forget. They forgive slowly, feud memorably, and record everything in the currency of story. Tonight's jokes will be tomorrow's tales. And tomorrow's tales might shape next year's match. And yet, despite the danger, despite the bruised ribs and sharper words, no one leaves. Because this is the only place where all of it, horse fights, insults, apologies, songs, threats, and stew, can be aired safely. Out in the open, beneath the stars, with just enough ale to smooth the rough edges. You lean back now, watching the fire crackle. Somewhere in the dark, a horse nickers. A handler hums a melody that might be a lullaby or might be a taunt. It's hard to tell in this light. And just when it seems the night has quieted, someone stands up, raises a mug, and begins a sentence with, "Let me tell you what really happened today." Oh no. Here we go again. A fight that changed the law again. Morning rises slow and heavy. Like a sheep reluctant to leave its hay. The fire's gone out. The stew pot's crusted over. And the only thing louder than the birds is the groaning of half a dozen men regretting every decision they made after the fourth cup of ale. But you're walking toward a field already whispering with tension. Today isn't just another horse fight. It's the fight. The one everyone's been murmuring about since last summer. Since the last law revision. Since the match where someone didn't just lose a stallion, but a life. They called it the Black Match. Not because it happened at night, but because the mood turned so fast. So dark. And so irreversible. 2 handlers. 2 stallions. A history of family rivalry so thick you could spread it on bread. They'd fought before. Many times. And every match ended in bruises. Pride wounds. And hours of passive-aggressive silence. But last year? It escalated. No one remembers what triggered it. Some say one man accused the other of hobbling his horse's back leg with a leather strap. Others claim a woman in the crowd laughed at the wrong time. But during the fight, as the horses clashed, so did the handlers. First it was shouting, then shoving, then fists, then someone drew a knife. The match ended not with a cheer, but a scream. The man who fell, let's call him Hallgrimur, bled out before anyone could stop it. The horses were uninjured. The humans, however, would never be the same. That tragedy shocked even the Alingi. Because for all their quirks, Icelanders took the balance of their society seriously. Blood feuds were dangerous. Feasts were messy. But a killing, during a horse fight? That was new. That was unacceptable. So they changed the law. This time, the scribes added clauses, more specific than before. A match that resulted in any serious bodily injury would now trigger a full legal review. If violence erupted between handlers, both could be fined or outlawed. And here's the big one. Horse fights had to be declared in advance to a local chieftain. Surprise matches? No longer acceptable. Historians still argue whether this was the turning point in Icelandic public violence. Some say it marked the beginning of a more civil era. Fewer brawls. More structured competitions. Others believe it was too little. Too late. A law trying to corral emotions that refused to be leashed. Either way, today's match is the first under the new rules. And you can feel the difference. There are boundary markers now. Small posts hammered into the earth to define the fight area. A man with a staff, the closest thing to a referee, stands watchfully. Brow furrowed. The handlers have been warned, no contact. Stay behind the line, keep the shouting civil, and under no circumstances may weapons be carried. It's not quite tense, not yet, but it's tight, like a storm cloud that hasn't decided whether to rain. The match begins. The stallions are fierce, biting, kicking, wrestling in the mud. The crowd roars. But the handlers? They're stiff, cautious, watching each other more than their horses. One sneezes and earns a suspicious glare. Another adjusts his belt and is told to keep his hands visible. Everyone remembers Hallgrimur. No one wants a repeat. The match ends without incident. One stallion wins with a well-placed kick to the shoulder. And its handler lifts his arms but does not step forward. The other nods once. No fists. No curses. Just a slow, controlled walk back to the horses. It's anticlimactic. And yet, people clap. Not a wild cheer. Not the roaring madness of older matches. But something new. A kind of communal relief. It happened. It ended. No one died. Later that evening, as fires crackle and ale cups are passed around more cautiously than usual. A few elders talk about the changes. One says he misses the old days. A proper fight, he mutters. Needed a little blood. Another disagrees. A proper society, he replies. Knows when to stop. Someone toasts to Hallgrimur. Silence follows. Not somber. Just respectful. The kind of quiet that acknowledges a line that should never have been crossed. You lean back against a boulder, watching the stars emerge, and you wonder, did the law really change things? Or did the people just grow tired of the grief? Maybe both. But either way, Iceland will never forget the match that tipped the balance. The one that reminded them just how thin the line is between sport and tragedy, between honor and regret, and how, sometimes, the bravest thing a man can do after a loss is to walk away quietly and let the horses rest. Horse whisperers and stallion trainers. It's early morning again, and the fields are silver with dew. You're no longer surrounded by cheering crowds or boasting handlers. Instead, you've wandered off the well-worn paths into the calm, rhythmic world of Iceland's most undervalued citizens, the horse trainers. Not the loud ones who scream during matches. Not the ones who slap their stallions and puff out their chests like prize birds. No, these are the quiet ones. The whisperers. The ones who know how to calm a biting stallion with a glance and a soft breath. The ones who wake before dawn and train not with brute force, but with patience. You meet one now. A woman named Brynhild. She's older than the sagas remember and has more stories than she'll ever tell. Her hands are rough, her eyes like polished stones, and her voice barely louder than the wind. She doesn't say much. She just watches you watching her horse. The horse, a deep gray stallion with a thick mane and one chipped ear, stands completely still as she approaches. She doesn't bark orders. She doesn't yank on the rope. She just moves. Slowly, purposefully. She lifts her hand, brushes the horse's neck, and murmurs something that sounds like a lullaby. "This one," she says softly, "used to bite." Then she smiles, not proudly, but like someone who remembers that particular phase of a moody teenager. Horse training in medieval Iceland is no easy task. These aren't docile field ponies. They're spirited, strong, sometimes unpredictable, and they're expected not only to carry their owners across lava fields and snow-covered hills, but also to fight when called upon. That means trainers had to walk a delicate line. Too gentle, and the horse becomes soft, easy prey in a match. Too harsh, and it becomes wild, liable to turn on its own handler. The perfect horse? Obedient, proud, quick to react, but slow to panic, a reflection of its trainer. Historians still debate the techniques used. Some claim early Icelanders used voice cues, rhythmic touch, and songs to guide horses into calm focus. Others point to bits and bridles, to long hours of repetitive groundwork. But one thing they agree on: Icelanders deeply respected the horses they trained. Even those who entered them into fights didn't see the matches as cruelty. They saw them as showcasing honor, of the animal and of the human behind it. And it wasn't just men. Despite the saga focus on male warriors and feuding chieftains, women played an important, often hidden, role in the training of horses, especially in the early years of settlement, when survival demanded every hand be useful, and gender lines blurred in the face of snowstorms and stubborn livestock. Brynhild tells you a story, quietly, while rubbing the stallion's flank, of her grandmother, who trained a horse that refused to be broken by any man. The horse bit, kicked, screamed. They called it cursed. One night, her grandmother stayed in the pen with it, all night long, singing, sitting still, waiting. By morning, the horse was resting its head in her lap. 2 years later, it won 3 fights in a row and was retired in glory. That horse's name? Whispered Tooth, which sounds like the title of a forgotten Icelandic saga. And maybe it should be. You watch as Brynhild lifts the stallion's leg, checks its hoof, and murmurs again, not commands, but questions. Still sore? Or just being dramatic? She jokes. More to herself than to you. There's a tenderness here you haven't seen in the ring. A softness rarely recorded in the sagas. Horse training isn't loud. It's not glorious. It doesn't make it into the verse unless something goes terribly wrong or spectacularly right. But it's the foundation of everything else. You think back to the matches, to the shouting, the glory, the legal arguments, and you realize none of that happens without the whisperers. They're the ones who know which stallion has a temper, which one is steady, which one was spooked by lightning 3 winters ago and hasn't quite trusted the wind since. And they prepare accordingly. They know when to push, and when to rest, when to feed extra oats, and when to let the horse run just to burn the ghosts out of its legs. And they know that behind every powerful stallion is 100 quiet mornings like this one. Historians rarely write their names down. The sagas don't give them heroic speeches. But the horses remember. You can see it in how they lean in close, how they follow without reins, how they seem to exhale when their trainer arrives. You leave Brynhild with a nod, and she nods back. No grand farewell, just a mutual understanding. You've seen the real work now, the care, the quiet power behind the public spectacle. And as you walk away, you hear her whisper again, not to you, but to the stallion. Steady now, no more biting. Horse fights as flirting rituals. The next time you stumble into a crowd gathered for a match, something feels different. Sure, there's still the usual stomping hooves, handlers pacing nervously, stallions eyeing each other like seasoned rivals. But off to the side, under a sagging canopy of stitched hides, are the real spectators of interest today. Young women in braided hair and layered wool dresses, whispering, giggling, and very, very observant. Because while you've come expecting a clash of hooves and pride, you're about to discover another, lesser-known truth about Icelandic horse fights. They were also dating events. That's right, for all their masculine bravado, horse fights doubled as surprisingly effective courtship arenas. In a world without speed dating, romantic comedies, or algorithm-based matchmaking, where else could you scout for a partner's strength, patience, style, and ability to shout creative insults, all in the span of 20 minutes? You sit beside a group of girls, maybe 16 or 17, all chewing dried berries and judging the handlers more than the horses. That one wears his belt too high, one says, wrinkling her nose. The other looks like he's never brushed a mane in his life, says another. The third simply shrugs. I'd marry that stallion before I'd marry him. Subtle? No. Effective? Absolutely. It turns out, these events weren't just about bragging rights. They were opportunities, social showcases, chance meetings, excuses to show off not just your animal, but your character. A good horse was a reflection of a good man, dependable, spirited, and preferably not drooling. And a victory in the ring? Well, it didn't guarantee a proposal, but it certainly didn't hurt your chances. One saga even tells of a chieftain's daughter who agreed to dance with a young man only after his stallion won 3 matches. When asked what changed her mind, she reportedly said, "I wanted to see if he could train something more stubborn than me." Historians still argue whether these flirting rituals were intentional or accidental. Some believe the events naturally drew communities together, making courtship inevitable. Others suggest the gatherings were subtly designed to give young people a chance to mingle while their elders were distracted by bets and broths. Either way, it worked. There's even an account, semi-legendary, but too charming to dismiss, of a woman who trained a stallion in secret. She entered it under her brother's name, and when it won, she revealed the truth to an impressed, and slightly embarrassed, suitor. They were married the next spring. The horse was given extra dried fish at the wedding. And it wasn't just about winning. How a man lost a fight said a lot. Did he curse? Did he sulk? Or did he laugh it off, shake hands, and help his stallion walk home? That was the moment many onlookers paid attention. Because strength was admirable, but grace under humiliation? That was unforgettable. One of the older women near you, gray braids, a face like weathered stone, leans over and mutters. The boys think they're competing with their horses. Really, they're being judged harder than the stallions. You glance back at the crowd. Sure enough, the women aren't just watching the ring, they're watching the handlers. Who flinches? Who shouts too loud? Who treats his animal like a partner instead of a pawn? It's a delicate kind of theater. The men think they're showing off. The women are taking notes. You can imagine how it plays out later that evening, when the stew pots are bubbling and songs rise around the fires. A young man sits beside a girl and offers her a share of his smoked lamb. She asks how his horse is doing. He modestly downplays the win, then lets slip that his mare had foaled that spring. She smiles. He passes her a second piece of lamb. Just like that, a romance begins. There are even matchmaking tales where families arranged introductions based on horsefight reputations. You should meet Helga, one mother might say. Her father's stallion hasn't lost in 3 years. And she's the one who oils his hooves. It's not glamour. It's not candlelight and serenades. But it's real, tangible, rooted in shared labor, community admiration, and just a little bit of theater. You watch now as one handler helps another gather his tack after a loss. No insults, no cold glares, just a quick nod and a quiet exchange. The crowd notices, so do the women, and maybe that, more than the fight itself, is what will be remembered. Because in Iceland, reputation is sticky. A good match, a well-trained horse, a respectful nod in defeat, these things echo longer than victory. And sometimes, love begins not with a sonnet, but with a stallion. When the horses just walked away, you return to the fields expecting thunder, hooves pounding, handlers shouting, reputations teetering like overstacked firewood. But today's match doesn't erupt. It doesn't even whimper. Because something truly unexpected happens. The horses simply walk away. That's right, they're led into the ring. The handlers release the ropes. And instead of charging or posturing, the stallions glance at each other, flick their tails, and begin casually grazing. A ripple of confusion rolls through the crowd. First, a few chuckles, then scattered laughter, then murmurs. Are they broken? Have they been fixed? Did someone feed them before the match? Someone offers, helpfully. Maybe they're in love. You sit back, amused, and realize, this isn't a fluke. It happens more often than people care to admit. Because for all the bluster, all the rituals, all the pride that surrounds Icelandic horsefights, sometimes, the horses simply aren't in the mood. And unlike their handlers, they're not interested in pretending. In sagas and oral accounts, there are scattered mentions of this phenomenon. Horses brought into the arena who refused to engage. Not frightened, not weak, just unbothered. They'd sniff the air, look around, maybe nudge their opponent in a gesture closer to friendship than fury. And then wander off. One even lay down mid-match and began rolling in the grass. That one was later nicknamed Skoldungur, a word meaning shield bearer, but also used sarcastically to mean someone who avoids battle. He was never entered into a fight again, but he became a favorite with children, and according to some, lived longer than any stallion in the district. Handlers hated when this happened. It was a reputation disaster. You'd spent months preparing your horse, boasting in the feasting hall, composing preemptive victory verses, only for your stallion to shrug, metaphorically, and start chewing moss. One handler was said to have yelled, mid-match, "Don't make me get in there and fight for you." His stallion responded by walking over and standing behind him, as if saying, "Be my guest." Historians still argue what these refusals meant. Some believe it revealed the true intelligence of the Icelandic horse, that they could sense danger or futility and simply chose not to participate. Others say it pointed to poor training, a misjudgment in preparation, or even a misalignment in temperament. Some horses just weren't born to brawl. You watch now as the handlers try every trick in the saga book. Shouts, gestures, a strange high-pitched whistle that makes even you flinch. One slaps the ground, the other offers his stallion a whiff of the opponent's mane. Still nothing. One of the stallions, bless him, wanders over to a small girl sitting on a rock and lets her pat his nose. The crowd AWWS. The match is unofficially declared, undecided. One man throws his hands up and mutters, "Well, at least no one lost teeth this time." There's something almost profound about it. In a culture obsessed with strength and honor, the animals remind everyone that conflict isn't always necessary. Sometimes, walking away is the victory. Of course, not everyone agrees. There are mutterings of curses, of secret runes that may have softened the horse's fire. One handler accuses the other of feeding calming herbs before the match. Another claims the weather's wrong, that a true fight can't start when the breeze smells of fish. He's probably just embarrassed, but the logic is amusing. Still, others see it differently. This, says a gray-bearded man leaning on a walking stick, is the gods telling us we fight too much. His neighbor replies, or the gods are bored. They both laugh, but the moment lingers. The horses are led away with no cuts, no bruises, no victory songs, just a slow, dignified departure, the kind of exit you'd expect from creatures who clearly have nothing left to prove. And back at the tents, the story is already changing. Some say the stallions refused to fight out of mutual respect. Others say they recognized each other as half-brothers. One woman claims she saw them nod before disengaging. Another jokes that they were simply tired of being dragged into human drama. By nightfall, someone's penned a 4-line verse. Two stallions met, but chose not to bite. They grazed and sighed beneath the light. No blood was spilled, no cheers arose. Just quiet peace, where pride once froze. It's not exactly a saga, but it's something better, a memory without scars. And so, you stretch your legs, breathe the cool evening air, and smile, because sometimes, the best stories are the ones where nothing happens, where fury fizzles, where animals teach humans a lesson they're slow to learn. That walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's wisdom. Magical stallions and superstitions. Tonight, the stars are out early, and the wind is just strong enough to rattle the turf roofs and set the horses snorting in their sleep. You're lying on your back beside a dying fire, staring into the sky, when someone leans over and whispers, "Don't look too long, some stallions are born from stars." You know. You smile, expecting a joke, but your storyteller is dead serious. Welcome to one of the strangest corners of the Icelandic horsefight tradition. The world of superstitions and magical horses. Because of course it wasn't enough that these animals could fight, transport, and win you a wife. They also, according to folklore, could do things like see spirits, walk between realms, and curse your crops if disrespected. You glance around the dark field. A few horses in the distance shift, their eyes catching the firelight just enough to glint. And suddenly, you understand the superstition. In a land where the sun disappears for months and volcanoes erupt without warning. It's no wonder people came to believe that some horses weren't entirely of this world. There were signs. They said, if a foal was born under a blood moon, it might carry the power to resist all bites. If a horse refused to cross running water, any water, it might be cursed or have a secret name only spirits could speak. And if your stallion neighed at empty fields 3 nights in a row, best not to enter him into a fight anytime soon. One saga tells of a horse named Manablo, Moonblood, whose coat shimmered unnaturally in moonlight. He was undefeated in matches until the day he vanished. Simply slipped his halter, walked into the fog, and was never seen again. The match he didn't fight ended in a death. Some took it as a warning. And then there were the handlers. Some swore by charms, little runes carved into bone, braided into the horse's mane, or sewn into the underside of saddle blankets. Others whispered protective staves before matches, or walked their horses 3 times around a standing stone for luck. If your horse started sneezing before a fight, you cancelled the match. Sneezing was a bad sign. A very bad sign. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were widespread or only existed in isolated regions. Some suggest the rituals were half serious, an attempt to feel some control over unpredictable animals and even more unpredictable matches. Others believe they were deeply ingrained, a quiet layer of spirituality beneath the sport. And let's not forget the dreams. There's an account of a woman who dreamt of a white stallion standing on a hill, refusing to come down. She told her husband not to fight that week. He ignored her. His horse broke its leg within minutes. Coincidence? Maybe. But to Icelanders, Dreams were rarely just dreams. They were warnings, whispers from the unseen world. And horses, being somewhere between wild and domestic, real and mythic, made the perfect messengers. Even the naming of horses could be a kind of invocation. Names like Storm Hoof, Night Breath, or Ghost Eye weren't just poetic. They told you something about the animal's spirit, about what to expect, about what to fear. And then there were the rare stallions that, even without mystical traits, earned reputations that bordered on the legendary. One such horse, Floki's Flame, was said to recognize liars. If a handler approached who'd ever stolen from a neighbor, cheated on a bet, or lied about a match result, Flame would rear, snort, and refuse to be mounted. Flame never lost a fight. But more importantly, Flame never fought for a man unworthy. Of course, the skeptics always existed too. An older man near the fire chuckles as someone recounts a story about a ghost horse who could vanish in mist. Or maybe, he says dryly, he was just very fast and poorly tied. Laughter bubbles up, but even he glances over his shoulder when a nearby stallion whinnies into the dark. You begin to see that these stories, superstitions, and half-believed charms aren't about gullibility. They're about awe, about respect. These aren't just horses, they're companions in a wild, whispering world where nature rules and memory is sharper than swords. You watch as someone ties a tiny woven charm into a stallion's forelock. A simple loop of wool and feather. They say it keeps bad thoughts away. You wonder, is it for the horse, or the handler? Because sometimes, magic isn't about power. It's about reassurance, a little hope, braided into hair, a quiet prayer before the storm. And here, in the silence between fights, under a sky littered with stars and old stories, you understand why even the fiercest warrior might pause before entering the ring. Press a hand to their horse's mane, and whisper, not orders, but respect. Be safe. Priests, pagans, and political potholes. By the time you wake up, the wind has changed, not just in direction, but in tone, something stirring in the hearts of the people. And it isn't just nerves before a match. No, today's tension is different, subtler, like a thin layer of frost before a storm. You follow the murmurs to a clearing, where two men, one wearing the rough, fur-trimmed cloak of a pagan goy, the other in the simple dark robes of a Christian priest, stand on opposite sides of a group of nervous handlers. Between them, a stallion stamps its hooves. Not at another horse, at them. You've walked into the uncomfortable space where horse fights, once purely a matter of pride and spectacle, are beginning to collide with belief. Because this isn't just about bloodlines anymore. It's about gods, or rather, whose god is allowed to bless the horse. Welcome to the Christianization of Iceland, one of the strangest, slowest, and most grudging conversions in medieval Europe. Officially adopted around the year 1000, Christianity swept in like a hesitant tide. People were baptized, churches were built, crosses carved in stone, and yet, in private, the old ways lingered, sacrifices still happened, pagan names still carried weight. And horse fights? Well, those stayed awkwardly in the middle. See, to the Christian priests, especially the more zealous ones recently arrived from the mainland, horse fighting was problematic. Too much violence, too much pride, and, in some cases, too many pagan rituals performed beforehand. Sprinkling mead over the horse's mane? That's definitely a no-no. Whispering Old Norse blessings before the match? Blasphemy. Absolute blasphemy. But to the old guard, the pagan gore and their followers, horse fighting wasn't just entertainment. It was tradition, a way to honor the gods of strength and will. A performance of masculine energy that, while not always sacred, was certainly not sinful. So began the slow, uneasy dance between faiths, one that would play out for generations. Sometimes in churches, sometimes in law courts, and more often than not, on muddy fields with nervous horses watching men argue about morality. Historians still debate just how much the church tried to suppress horse fighting. Some argue that the Alinghi, influenced by early Christian law, began imposing stricter limits on matches not just to prevent violence, but to discourage pagan associations. Others suggest that the fights were tolerated so long as no open ritual accompanied them. What's clear is this: the more Christian Iceland became, the more awkward horse fights became. One match, famously recorded in both church archives and a local saga, tells of a priest who arrived mid-event and tried to stop the bout with a sermon about humility and restraint. He was hit with a piece of stale bread. The stallions, unimpressed, continued to fight. The priest later claimed this as divine punishment. Others claimed it was just poor timing and poor baking. Still, some tried to adapt. You hear whispers of handlers crossing themselves before a match, followed immediately by muttered pagan blessings, just in case. Some started renaming their horses with biblical names: Gabriel, Judah, even Noah, though that one was reportedly terrified of water. One clever trainer reportedly trained his stallion using psalms, recited in rhythm. The horse never lost a match, but also neighed during every Sunday sermon for the rest of its life. The deeper irony? Horse fights remained one of the few remaining spaces where both faiths mingled. However uneasily. A pagan might cheer beside a Christian. A newly baptized woman might bet on her uncle's stallion, even though he still sacrificed oats to Thor. The horses didn't care. Neither did the mud. One handler, when pressed by a priest about whether the fights encouraged sin, simply replied, "Better to let the stallions bite than the men." And really, that summed it up. For all their noise and chaos, horse fights prevented violence as often as they caused it. In a society trying to find its spiritual footing, that mattered. You wander back toward the tents now, where stew bubbles and someone tunes a lyre. Behind you, the priest and the goy have stopped arguing. They're sharing a skin of sour milk. Not friends, exactly, but no longer enemies. Maybe that's the strange, begrudging magic of Icelandic society. A place where opposites don't always clash, they coexist. Quietly, side by side, in wind and wool and hoofbeats. And in that space between prayer and tradition, stallions still rear, handlers still shout, and the people, whether wearing a cross or carving runes, still gather to watch, to cheer, and to remember what the sagas don't tell you. Tonight, the fire burns lower than usual, and your storyteller, an old man with a voice like worn leather and fingers that twitch when he lies, leans in close. "You know what the sagas leave out?" he whispers. "Everything interesting." And he's right, in a way, for all their drama and detail. The Icelandic sagas, those rich, winding records of feuds, family, and fate, are often strangely silent when it comes to the everyday truths behind horse fights. They tell you who fought, who won, who died, but the quiet truths, the awkward ones, the strange little customs and uncomfortable pauses, those vanish between the lines. You think back to all the tales you've heard over the past weeks. The cheering crowds, the wounded pride, the whispered superstitions, the stallions that refused to fight. And you begin to realize, the sagas weren't documentaries. They were curated, stylized, written for memory, not honesty. Take the story of a famous chieftain, immortalized in verse for having a stallion so strong it split the earth with its hooves. Sounds impressive, until you learn that his horse was widely known for falling asleep during matches. The split earth? A poetic way of describing a dramatic stumble. Then there's the saga that skips over the fact that one glorious victory happened because the rival handler tripped on his cloak, spooked his own stallion, and accidentally knocked himself out with a branch. Nowhere is that detail mentioned. Instead, we read of honor, destiny, and the roar of the crowd. The branch? Forgotten. Why? Because the sagas had a job: to build legacy. And legacy demands heroes, not accidental slapstick and stallions with performance anxiety. Historians still argue over what this selective storytelling means. Some believe it's harmless, just the nature of early literature. Others think it reveals something deeper about Icelandic culture, a preference for polished pride over messy truth. And nowhere is that clearer than with the women. The sagas mention them rarely at horse fights. A line here, a glance there, a passing comment about a girl who wept when her brother's stallion lost. But the women you've seen? They train horses. They whisper to them. They judge the handlers more sharply than any man ever dared. Some even quietly own the horses, letting male relatives fight them on their behalf to avoid public scrutiny. But the sagas? Silent. And then there are the deals. Quiet arrangements made before matches. Let my stallion win today. I'll vote for your cousin at the Ain. Or, if yours wins, I'll marry off my niece with no dowry request. These weren't always sinister, just practical. A society without kings needs its own politics. And sometimes, that politics wore a horse's mane. You won't find those exchanges in any parchment, but you hear whispers of them everywhere. In the way two handlers avoid eye contact. In the sudden disappearance of a strong horse just before a rematch. In the way a chieftain announces a victory before the stallions have even entered the ring. None of that fits the saga structure. It's too slippery, too human. And then there are the things too painful to say outright. The handlers who broke after a match. The stallions that never recovered from a brutal loss. The fights that ended not in glory but in guilt. The sagas don't tell you about the man who sold his winning stallion because he couldn't stand the attention. Or the boy who refused to enter a match again after his horse, terrified, turned on him. You see the space between the stories now, not just what's included, but what's avoided, the gaps where real life hides. One local tale, never written, but told around fires, speaks of a stallion that refused to fight year after year. Its handler kept entering it, hopeful, patient, maybe a little stubborn, and finally, the horse fought, fiercely, won. The crowd cheered, but the handler? He cried. Why? No one's sure. The saga version would say, he cried for joy. But those who knew him say something else. He cried because he'd broken something soft that couldn't be unbroken. And that would never make it into the sagas. Because Icelandic storytelling, for all its beauty, was built to endure. And sometimes, enduring means leaving out the bits that don't shine. But you know better now. You've walked the muddy fields. You've seen the fights and the stalls. The injuries and the flirtations. The boasts and the silences. You've felt the pride that pulses in every hoofbeat, and the pain that follows. Quietly, behind. And so, as the old man finishes his story, scratches his beard, and asks if you want to hear the real tale of Frostmane's last match, you nod, because sometimes, the truth hides in the stories that were never written at all. The final horse fight band. You wake up to the sound of distant hooves, only this time. They're not galloping toward a fight. They're pulling a cart, carrying barrels of ale, bundles of wool, and one particularly bored goose. In the distance, there's a quiet gathering, but it's not near the field. It's at the church, a different kind of crowd, a different kind of day. Because this, they say, is the last match, officially sanctioned, publicly announced. One final bout before the new law takes hold, the law that ends it all. You walk slowly toward the site, not quite believing it. You've heard this before, the final match, the end of the tradition. But this time, it's different. This time, the field is smaller, the markers more rigid. There's a priest and a chieftain overseeing the match, and a scribe, quill in hand, recording names with the solemnity of a man writing an obituary. The atmosphere is strange, quiet, reverent, less like a festival, more like a funeral. Two stallions are led in, handsome, well-bred, aware of the weight on their shoulders. Their handlers wear expressions like carved wood. One whispers to his horse, not encouragement, but thanks. The crowd doesn't roar, it hums. You feel the collective awareness. This is history. The last time a fight like this will happen without fines, without scorn, without quiet judgment from the church steps. Why? Because the world has changed. Violence is no longer an acceptable ritual. Pride is being asked to express itself with words, not hooves. And the new laws are clear. Horsefighting, once a symbol of spirited tradition, is now officially banned, not just regulated, banned. Historians trace this final push to a mixture of reasons. Some say it was pressure from the church. Horsefights too often bordered on pagan ritual. Too bloody, too loud, too proud. Others blame political shifts, as Iceland moved toward union with Norway. Leaders wanted a more civilized image. Still others suggest it was fatigue. Too many fights that ended in feuds. Too many young handlers lost to pride or accident. Too much bruised bone and broken trust. Whatever the reason, this is the end. The match begins. The horses circle, cautious at first. There's no shouting from the crowd. No handlers egging them on. Just murmured observation. One stallion faints. The other reacts. And for a moment you wonder if they sense it too, this final performance. They engage. Once. Twice. A few powerful kicks. A swirl of dirt. Then they separate. Panting. Not retreating. Just, done. And just like that, it ends. No clear victor. No injuries. No drama. Just two strong stallions who performed their task. Then bowed out gracefully. The handlers bow, too, toward each other. A gesture so rare, so symbolic. The crowd murmurs in approval. A bell rings from the nearby chapel. Not to announce the winner, but to mark the hour. And the end. Later, as the horses are led away and people pack up their goods, someone starts singing an old verse. Not loud, just a quiet farewell. No more thunder. No more cheers. Hooves rest quiet after years. Let the pride now walk in peace. Let the fighting songs all cease. You hear someone behind you whisper, "It had to end, but I'll miss it." Someone else replies, "We all will, but not the bruises." And the handlers? They don't speak. They lead their stallions back to their pens with quiet dignity. The stallions munch hay. They don't know their legends now. You overhear that future violations will be punished with steep fines. That unauthorized matches will be shut down. That anyone seen training a stallion for combat will be watched. The laws are thorough. The message is clear. It's over. Not with fire or riot, but with a silent nod and a soft goodbye. And as you walk away from the field for the last time, you feel something in the air, relief. Perhaps. Or regret. Or both. Because even in a society built on endurance, some things cannot last forever. Icelanders still love their horses. You return a few weeks later, curious to see what remains. The fight field is quiet now, overgrown with low brush and the early yellow buds of wildflowers. The old marker posts have been pulled up. No hoofprints, no shouting, just silence and a few grazing shapes in the distance. But here's the twist. The horses never left. There may be no more fights. No more handlers pacing the edge of a match with clenched fists and silent bets, but the Icelandic people? They still love their horses. Perhaps now more than ever. You approach a small farmstead, where a young woman, Freydis, her braid flapping like a flag in the wind, waves you in and hands you a wooden brush. "Here," she says with a grin, "you can work for your breakfast." The stallion she leads toward you is a broad-backed beauty. Chestnut with a white star on its nose and a personality that seems half curious, half haughty. His name's Leone, she adds. Means, lion. Don't tell him he's small. You brush in silence for a while, watching Freydis feed oats, clean hooves, whistle soft commands, and then she says something that sticks. "My grandfather fought with his horses. My father bred them for work. I ride mine for joy." And just like that, you understand. The spirit of those matches, of pride, of power, of partnership, never disappeared. It simply shifted. The energy that once exploded in public clashes now flows into gentler forms. Trail riding, careful breeding, quiet competitions that test stamina, elegance, and intelligence instead of brute force. Historians mark this change as part of Iceland's transformation, the shift from rugged, clan-based survival to a more cooperative, pastoral society. But locals? They talk about it differently. They say the horses changed. Too. They're calmer now. One elderly farmer tells you later. Less wild. Or maybe we just learned to listen better. You pass children racing bareback along a gravel path, laughter echoing behind them. You see families taking their horses to water. Not for bathing, but because they like to splash. And everywhere, you feel the affection, deep, unspoken, earned over centuries of shared hardship. There's even a festival now, Ljósastar dagur, or Day of the Bright Horses. No fights, no judges, just parades, songs, ribbons tied in manes. One of the most popular events? A stallion poetry contest. Yes, really. People write verses dedicated to their favorite horses and recite them on a little wooden stage while the horses munch grass nearby. Unimpressed but honored, you hear one poem that ends. He fought no wars, but bore my weight, through snow, through storm, through heaven's gate. His hooves beat songs the earth still keeps. My lion sleeps, but never sleeps. You realize something else. In ending the fights, Iceland didn't lose its connection to horses. It refined it, pulled it out of the mud and into the heart. No longer about whose horse can bite harder. Now it's about how a horse moves, listens, trusts, how it mirrors the human walking beside it. And the Icelandic horse? It hasn't lost a step. It still walks with impossible grace. Still weathers storms with that thick, two-layer coat. Still picks its way across lava fields like it invented gravity. One modern writer tells you, my horse doesn't fight, but he knows when I'm upset before I do. That's better. You sit again by a quiet field, the sun sinking over the distant ridges, and watch a dozen horses graze, some resting, some nudging each other playfully. The wind plays with their manes. The grass whispers with old stories. And though no fights are held anymore, the legacy of those matches, those centuries of hoofbeat and heart, still pulses here. Not in violence, not in competition, but in care, in connection, in pride. Because the Icelanders still love their horses. Only now, they show it not with shouts, but with softness. What the law meant, really, now that the dust has settled, you're left with a question that lingers longer than hoofbeats. What did the law actually mean? Not just the part about fines and forbidden matches. Not the ink on parchment or the quotes recited at the Alþingi. But the deeper meaning, the soul of the decision, what it meant to declare. In no uncertain terms. This stops here. You sit on a low stone wall, overlooking a patch of earth once worn flat by fighting stallions. Now, it's just part of a pasture. No different than any other. The birds sing above, a few sheep wander by. No one's yelling, no one's betting. But if you listen closely, if you remember, you can still feel the echoes. At first glance, it was just a law banning a sport, a way to stop injuries, curb violence, appease a rising religious power, and clean up Iceland's public image. But dig a little deeper, and Icelanders always dig deeper, you'll find that the ban was more than practical. It was philosophical. It asked a society to grow up, to move beyond a past where strength was proven by dominance, where a man's worth could ride on a horse's teeth, where disputes were handled not through words, but through kicks. And that's no easy thing to ask. Because for generations, the horse fight wasn't just a pastime. It was a language, a way to say, I'm here, I matter, watch me. It was community theater wrapped in fur and fury. A public declaration of your place in the world. Taking that away wasn't just cutting off a sport, it was asking people to redefine pride. Historians still argue whether it worked. Some say the ban succeeded only on paper. That secret matches still happened for years, quietly, in remote valleys, far from priests and parchment. Others believe the shift was more than surface deep, that Icelanders wanted to change. That after enough bruised ribs and ruined friendships, the community chose peace. But here's the thing. Laws don't make societies moral. They don't erase instincts or smooth out the rough edges of pride. What they do is offer a mirror. A moment. A chance to choose differently. And Iceland, slowly, did. You see it now in how horses are trained, more gentleness. More empathy. In how conflicts are handled, more mediation. Fewer curses. In how pride is still honored. But not at the cost of bruises. One elderly rider you meet later says it best. We didn't lose our fire. We just moved it from our fists into our stories. And indeed, the stories remain, not just in dusty sagas, but in poems and plays. In bedtime tales told to sleepy children who giggle at the idea of two grumpy stallions arguing with their teeth. The matches may be gone, but the meaning, the spirit of resilience, connection, and performance lives on. The law, in the end, wasn't about horses. It never really was. It was about people, about community, about the ancient art of turning conflict into conversation. You walk through the pasture one last time. The wind is soft. A stallion lifts his head, watches you pass, then lowers it again to graze. No threat, no performance, just peace. And that's the real victory. Tired stallions, quieter nights. The land is quiet now. Not empty, never empty, but settled. Like a body exhaling after holding its breath for centuries. You walk one final loop through the old paths. Past the hollow where matches once thundered. Along the ridge where wagers were whispered. Near the stream where handlers washed blood, human and otherwise, into the mossy banks. And it feels still. Not forgotten. Just at rest. There are no cheers. No challenge cries. No clatter of hooves kicking up pride and dust. But in this silence, something deeper hums. Not absence, but memory. The horses? They remain, not as warriors, but as companions. Their thick manes sway gently in the wind. Their hooves print soft indentations in the soil that once shook with rage. They're older now, or maybe it's just that we are, more tired of noise. More aware of what peace costs. And what fighting fails to fix. You visit one last stallion, a gray elder with clouded eyes. Kept by a farmer who remembers the days of fighting only through second-hand stories and the scar along his father's collarbone. The stallion leans into your touch. Steady and warm. Used to be, the farmer says. We'd breed them to be bold. Now we breed them to be kind. And there it is. The soft truth behind all the sagas. Behind the laws. Behind the shouting and the lawspeaker's weary voice. Iceland didn't lose its strength by ending the fights. It learned how to carry that strength more gently. Like a worn halter, still useful. But no longer pulled tight. You pass a field where children ride bareback in the low golden light of late evening. Their laughter doesn't echo like a battle cry. It floats. It heals. They don't know the rules of the old fights. They know games. Balance. Friendship. The horses don't buck or bellow. They trot like they were always meant to carry joy instead of grudges. Somewhere, in a distant farmhouse, a storyteller begins the tale of Frost Mane, of Red Tooth, of the match where no one won, but everyone remembered. The children listen with wide eyes, amazed that their sleepy ponies share blood with those fierce, stubborn beasts of legend, and in that retelling, the old stallions live again, not to fight, but to be understood. You find a rock to sit on. High on a bluff. The sea stretches wide below you. The wind carries salt and song and the faint smell of hay. Everything feels older here, but also, somehow, lighter. Like the land itself finally let go of something heavy it carried for too long. You close your eyes. Let the cold settle into your bones. And feel the hoofbeats of history fade beneath you. Blank. Underscore. Blank. So now, the last hoof has echoed. The last tale has been told. The horses sleep. The handlers rest. The fields that once held fire now hold only grass. And peace. You feel your breath slowing, matching the rhythm of this quiet land. Your fingers soften. Your thoughts untangle. Everything here has settled, so maybe you can, too. Whatever you carried into tonight, stress, stories, worries too big to hold, it can all fall gently now. Like snow on turf roofs. Let it melt, let it vanish into soft ground, never needing to fight again. This journey through mud and memory wasn't about conflict. It was about what remains after the noise. Not the bite or the brawl, but the bond, the quiet understanding between people and animals, between tradition and change, because sometimes, letting go of old battles is the bravest match of all. The horses taught us that. And so now, let the pasture grow wild. Let the stories sleep. Let your own heart slow to the rhythm of a tired stallion finally free of the rain. You've made it. You're safe here. Breathe in once more, deep and slow. And let the silence carry you the rest of the way into sleep.